neutrality and Britain violating our neutrality is unresolved by Washington. Jay's Treaty kind of does it for a little bit, but Britain, after Jay's Treaty expires, resumes kind of this impressment and other things that we don't like, and so we try the Embargo Act. That doesn't work. Ultimately, what does Madison do to get Britain to respect our neutrality? What does he do? We know this. Hey, declares war. Oh, who were the people that were the most anxious to eventually get Britain to recognize our neutrality and sovereignty by declaring war? What group of people did we say were the most supportive? What did we call them? Do you remember, Phillips? Oh, the Warhawks. What political party were the Warhawks in? Federalists or Republicans? Go ahead. They were Republicans. What geographic area were they from? These Warhawks that supported war. Yes. They were from the West and from the South, largely supporting the war. Interestingly enough, they're not from New England, the area of the country the most affected by Britain's violation of our neutrality. Who was the most famous Warhawk? Obviously, the most famous Warhawk Della was, we talked about him today. Go ahead. Henry Clay. So was John C. Calhoun. He was a Warhawk as well. Young, ambitious, energetic, kind of militant people that took, that were elected into office and pushed Madison to take a dramatic action and to declare war against Britain. When we declared war against Britain in 1812, would you describe the United States as being prepared for war? No, they weren't prepared for war. They had a weak army, a weak navy, really kind of expected the war to be relatively easy, and it doesn't fully work out that way. I mean, there aren't a lot of questions on the test about the War of 1812, but we could say this. Militarily, the Navy did far better in the War of 1812 than did the Army. I mean, we thought that it would be easy to take Canada. We invaded it on numerous occasions and have no success in basically militarily seizing Canada. In fact, in some cases, we actually lost territory. Certainly, the most humiliating part of the War of 1812 was having our own capital captured and burned and abandoned by the British. The most traumatic part of the war was the Battle of New Orleans, where an army of 8,000 British soldiers converged on a major city that was crucial to the safety and security and commerce of the country, and America was able to defend it. What was ironic, however, about the Battle of New Orleans? Yes, go ahead, Don. Yes, it was fought after the war had actually ended. Also, that Battle of New Orleans that ends the War of 1812 generates this sense of nationalism that we had been talking about. And we said this sense of nationalism, was this idea of a national spirit, a national identity, thinking of America, that was manifested in a number of ways. The American system, and we talked a little bit about the American system. We said the American system was kind of this economic/political ideology, a vision of a system that was no longer dependent upon trade with Britain. I mean, in the aftermath of the War of 1812, it's almost like America turns from looking at Europe and turns to the West and wants internal development. We don't need to have a manufacturing sector in England. We can cultivate our own manufacturing sector, and we can feed ourselves, and we can have cash crops, and we can trade amongst ourselves. All we need to do is protect our industry from Britain with tariffs, build internal improvements, and facilitate that trade with the national bank. That's the American system, economic nationalism. Political nationalism is this era of good feelings. The Federalists went away. I mean, they faded kind of from existence for numerous reasons. But one of them was the Hartford Convention. Darn it, what was that Hartford Convention? Does anybody but the instructor recall the Hartford Convention? Go ahead, Worms.
The Hartford Convention was a group of disgruntled Federalists met together, and they said either that you need to end the war or we are going to secede.
I wouldn't go that far. It was disgruntled Federalists that were frustrated with the war and wanted to prevent future activities like embargoes and wars from coming. And so they demanded that the national constitution be modified, amended, to protect them. It was a reflection of New England's fear of being overwhelmed by sort of a government that was dominated by Southerners and Westerners. And there was an implicit threat of secession. which doesn't come to fruition. But we said that the Hartford Convention coincides with the news from New Orleans, and the news from New Orleans is such a dramatic victory that the conventioneers seem to be disloyal and out of touch with the spirit of nationalism, which discredits the Federalists and contributes greatly to their demise. Now, we talked about how this nationalism was manifest in the feelings. We talked about how it was manifest in the American system. And we also talked about how it was manifest in the judicial actions of John Marshall. We talked about the Marshall Court. And we said that Marshall is going to use the court to define the role of the federal government in kind of this new nationalistic era and the role of state governments. And he keeps the notion of federalism alive. Marshall, we said, his decisions fundamentally attempted to protect private property, the sanctity of contracts, and the power of the national government. Of all the decisions that he made, we said, besides Marbury versus Madison, maybe the most significant was McCulloch versus Maryland. Why? Why was McCulloch versus Maryland potentially the most significant? Go ahead, Josh.
It's certainly the states not more powerful than the federal government.
Say it again.
It's certainly the state governments not more powerful than the federal government.
Yes, it really on some level confirms the loose interpretation of the Constitution and limits the power of states to undermine the power of the national government. So McCulloch versus Maryland is a significant one. We said the most enduring reflection of nationalism was in foreign affairs. And we talked about, solidification of the borders, the Rush-Bagot Treaty. What did that Rush-Bagot Treaty do? Anybody remember? Go ahead, Kelly. No? Go ahead, Worms.
Establish the Canadian border.
Yes, established Canada demilitarizes the Great Lakes. Adams Honest Treaty. What did that Adams Honest Treaty do? Well, people at home, they're going to say, that's not how you pronounce it, honest, honest, or something like that, yes.
Give us Florida.
Yes, acquired Florida for $5 million and established a permanent border between the Louisiana Territory and Mexico. But the most significant reflection of nationalism was the Monroe Doctrine. What was the gist? Who will say? Shannon, will you be the person that says what the gist of the Monroe Doctrine was? It was a statement by one president at one time. It was a warning to whom, dear Shannon? Monroe warns whom? Europe. To do what?
To like not come back and mess with America.
Right. Yeah, to come back and mess with America. To stay out. To stay out of the Western Hemisphere. To not attempt to reassert their influence power. To not attempt to recolonize the Western Hemisphere. Then we concluded by talking about those things that started to generate sectional discord. And we talked about the Panic of 1819, which was an economic contraction. Oh, who did they blame? Who did the people affected by the Panic of 1819 in the West blame for that panic, Marissa? Easterners and the Second Bank of the United States. Recalling that the First Bank of the United States went out of existence in 1811 and was rechartered a Second Bank in 1816 by Republicans. And then the Missouri Compromise, which we talked about today, which really terrified people that the issue of slavery or the extension of slavery would come on the national level. Okay, that should do it for the examination. Oh, that's a little late. Thank you for your kind attention, and we will see you tomorrow.